heard today, we're going to go back to Union Station.
Y después de que terminemos la sesión aquí con los congresistas, vamos a movernos de regreso hacia la Union Station.
You didn't say that how you didn't do this one. So, and we're going to have a small rally there at Union Station.
Vamos a hacer un rally pequeño, una marcha pequeña ahí.
To get on the 5 o'clock news.
To get on the 5 o'clock news.
Yay.
Para que podamos entrar en el círculo de noticias de las 5 de la tarde. Subimos a la mañana, ahora vamos a entrar en las noticias de la tarde.
So that would be like the cherry on top of our Sunday today.
Y básicamente es para ponerle las cerezas encima de la torta, del pastel.
And after we're done there, we're going to get on buses and we're going to go and dine together.
Y después de ese rally, vamos a montarnos a los autobuses, subimos a los autobuses y vamos a ir a cenar juntos.
It's nothing like celebrating over food, right? And then tomorrow we're going to go with you and support you guys and go back to your jobs tomorrow. And just like one worker said, we're going to hold you guys are going to hold your head up high and we're going to continue this battle, right?
Yeah.
Well, the battle is not over, but you know what? If we fight, we win.
We fight, we win. Entonces, mañana vamos a regresar todos al trabajo. Nosotros vamos a estar con ustedes cuando regresen al trabajo. Y como les dijimos anteriormente, tienen que regresar con la cabeza en alto, orgullosos, porque esta lucha todavía no se acaba. Y acuérdense que cuando se lucha, se gana.
All right, let's give yourself a hand. All right. So we'll start in about 5 minutes, everyone.
Empezamos alrededor de 5 minutos aproximadamente.
Hello?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3.
That's why I got like really
We'll be there. All right.
Oh, yeah. No, that's fine. I mean, everyone's in here, so we're all chill out. Everyone's been inside and then I've been rally all day, so I'm sure it's nice to sit down. Yeah, no, I think we're just waiting for votes to be over and then members are just going to go over. Get the show on the road. Okay, thank you. I know they have overflow spots. I'm not sure where that is. I was kind of waiting for Brad to get here.
And the speaker. Okay, and they're going to be facing this way. Just got it back. So like, but we just got it back. I think these are for the people sitting. Too. If I'm just
Yeah, mine's gonna be good. So they can all handle it. So, Brad's on his way.
it's a good picture.
That's what we need. We need to like. Okay. Well, we also need
This stuff is blocking.
yeah. We're gonna.
Would you like me to put all the, these are all the
Yeah, we can just kind of like lay them out.
maybe there or here?
No, this is where the speakers are gonna be. And we're gonna need to like pull this up, right? Well, we have chairs over here.
How would we gone?
Okay.
They're
We
testifying
need
to
to
the
move the
members.
chairs over here.
They're not testifying, unfortunately. We haven't gotten some public
Oh, so they, that makes sense. I was
So, that's, here, that's,
I don't think so. Yeah. All right. Okay. No, I'm in Washington. I will be in the office late.
Hey, lady.
They're gonna be sitting on this side?
Yeah, they all need to sit on this side.
Okay, that just
Okay.
screwed up my,
I'd love to come.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're testifying two members of Congress.
yeah, I kind of figured that out. Okay.
So we need to get.
Do you think they'll let me like stand on the steps?
There's like the back corners, but then you probably wouldn't get a good shot of the ball.
Where, do you know where is he gonna sit? I can't see the name tag.
We have him set over there, so maybe if you want
Actually, that's not bad.
yeah, you could try that. Oh, sorry.
Thank you for what you've done.
Antonio and what's his name? Roseboro.
So, what we decided was we're going to actually do.
Roberto, ¿cómo está?
And then immediately the workers.
¿Vio la dirección que le mandé?
So you guys have met, yeah. So Paco will
Ya los
translate.
conocemos. Tú lo vas a hacer en español y yo lo voy a leer como lo tenemos aquí en inglés. ¿Ok?
Le puedo. Ok, bueno, pues cuando usted llegue aquí donde estamos, yo le mando a alguien a que lo recoja allá afuera. Listo, pues. ¿Tú vas a traducir eso?
Sí, para él. Y luego las preguntas que le hagan.
Chévere. Él te va a traducir el hombre.
Listo, vamos.
Claro.
You hanging in there, Melissa? You hanging in there? Yeah? All right, good. Yes. Do you think we could talk to the president? Insanity. Absolutely insanity. No questions about it. How we doing?
Well, we need enough space for everyone to sit here.
What do we need? 3 more chairs?
We are going to need 4 more chairs.
We're going to need 4 more chairs.
Yes.
Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to put 2 workers for the rest of the panel. So then maybe what we'll do is we'll split it into 2 panels. We'll have the workers go and then get them seated over there. And then the 4 experts will come up and sit down. And then we can do questions and answers together. Does that make sense, Haley?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yes. So. Sonríele, sonríele. ¿No? Entonces vamos a leerlo así, así, así. O sea, cuando acabes acá, pausa, ¿no? Cajero, pausa. Edificio, pausa. Porque así me da tiempo de leerlo. Okay. Perfecto.
Aquí se voy a cambiar un poquito. Porque esto está...
¿Está mal?
Ajá.
¿Por qué?
Porque son 8 y los primeros 2 años son 6.50.
Ok.
Ajá.
Ok. Entonces vas a decir 6.50.
Sí.
Ok. Hey, Christian, how are you? ¿Cómo te sientes? Bien. Qué bueno.
Hasta la revolución. La revolución.
Ese está prendido.
This is on, no.
Thank you very much. Let me call this ad hoc meeting to order. And very briefly begin the meeting. Thank all our witnesses and thank all my colleagues for being here today on an extremely busy day for everyone. And we look forward to the testimony. We're going to have the workers as part of the first panel, and appropriately so. And then our other witnesses will follow next. We have, this is an opportunity, I think, to look at an issue that sometimes doesn't receive the attention that it should, and look at the faces of the people most affected by the wage scales that are being set by contractors that are doing direct business with the federal government. And I think that is the key point in this whole discussion. Now that I've called the meeting to order, let me turn this part of the meeting over to our Steny Hoyer, Congressman Hoyer. Let me turn the meeting over to my co-chair on the Progressive Caucus, who did a great deal of work in putting this together, Congressman Ellison, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be very brief because we're honored to have all of you here today. But also, you should know that there's a lot of caucuses around here, and when the minority leader and the minority whip are here with us today to address this issue of low-wage workers, that's actually a big deal, and it shines a light on this serious problem that I think is very important. So I just want to thank you, Mr. Whip, for being here, Mr. Hoyer. So let me just be clear. Demos, we owe them a debt of gratitude. Demos did a good job by doing a study which ultimately revealed that the federal government, through its contractors, is perhaps the biggest low-wage employer in the country. That's not a good sign, and I'm deeply disturbed by it. I was aware of this issue, but it was brought into real clear focus to me when me and Mark Pocan went to the Union Station and sat down and heard from workers who were Latino, who were African American, who were white, who were Asian, meaning all of us, right? And who explained desperate circumstances that they were working under every day. So we promised that we would do something about it. Now, there's no promises in life, but we can promise to work hard to make sure that we raise the wages of people who labor so hard, who are in the Air and Space Museum, the Indian Museum, the Reagan Building, the Union Station, America's buildings, who are being paid so little that it would be difficult for them to even buy a meal in the very building they work in. That's a shame, that's a disgrace, and something must be done about it. I also just want to mention to you that if we raise the wages of people who are making $8.25 or even less sometimes, we'll raise everybody's wages. So what you're doing is good for you and your family and your children, but it's good for everybody. You're helping everybody. And I know, and I want to acknowledge that many of you are taking a bold stand, because the truth is, you need your job. And you really, it takes a lot for you to step out and say, hey, I'm not going to just go along and get along no more. We need a change. It takes a lot of guts. And low-wage workers are stepping out strong all over this country. And McDonald's, the McDonald's fast food workers in New York stepped out strong and said they struck. In Chicago, they did the same thing. In Milwaukee, they did the same thing. And here you are making a stand for dignity, for prosperity, for yourself, for your family, for the whole country. So without me delaying anymore, I just want to say thank you for your bold, courageous stand, and thank you to the organizers, too. I was at the rally this morning, and I was just so privileged and honored to be there with you guys, with your awesome spirit. With the power that was out there in front of the Union Station, we could probably light up this whole country. So with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with that, let me turn the microphone over to our whip and leader of our caucus, and someone who, as Keith said so appropriately, we are honored that you're here with us, Mr. Hoyer. And with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank those of you who are here in the audience, showing the courage of which Co-Chairman Ellison spoke and Chairman Grijalva has spoken. I thank both of them for giving me this opportunity. This hearing is an important one about the difficulties faced by those working under federal contracts, earning at or less than minimum wage at a time when the cost of living is rising. I represent 62,000 federal employees. From the time I got here in 1981 to today, I fight very hard for their pay and benefits so that they will be paid a wage that will allow them to live in dignity and some degree of security. And there are some who say that our federal employees are overpaid. They particularly say that at the GS-9 level or below. And while that may be true that they get more pay than some in the private sector, that is not because they're overpaid. It is because those in the private sector are underpaid. And that is the focus that we ought to stay on. A number of these individuals live in my district, and this is an issue I'm very concerned about. These individuals being the individuals that are subject to this hearing, that are contract employees. I want to thank Change to Win for keeping this issue at the forefront of public consciousness. This hearing is a demonstration of the Progressive Caucus's commitment to ensuring that working families and those facing the toughest economic challenges are not forgotten in Congress. Indeed, I believe it is the soul of my party that focus be our number one focus. Jobs and economic security for our people. From hearing the stories of the workers here today and from what we've seen and heard in all of our districts in recent years, it is clear that the current minimum wage is outdated. Now, if I told you I was going to pay you $1.60 an hour, what would your response be? All right, let me change the question. If I told you I was going to pay you $1.60 minimum wage in 1968, what would your response be? You'd be wrong. That was the highest level of the minimum wage and was $2 plus, about $2.60 more than is being made today. It was akin to $7.80 today is akin to an hourly wage. Well, it's akin to, $7.80. The minimum wage in 1968 was akin to $10.57 today. $10.57 today would be the minimum wage if we had increased it by the cost of living since 1968. And so we are some $2.22 below that right now. The president wants $9. We want $10. We've introduced a bill at $10, which I've co-sponsored. And that's really what this is about. We did welfare reform. We said we wanted to make work pay. We didn't want to pretend to pay people. We really want to pay them so they're not living in poverty. Anyone can tell you that $7.25 an hour, even for 2 working adults, is not enough for a family to live on in America. You may be able to eat, but it's a struggle to afford the opportunities that secure a family's place in our middle class. The costs of education, health care, retirement savings have all risen faster than the minimum wage. President Obama proposed raising it to $9 an hour earlier this year. While I believe that extra $1.75 will certainly help those making the minimum wage, as I told you, in 1968, it would still be $3.47 below what was made in 1968. That's especially true given the new challenges they're facing, challenges of Congress's own making. Families subsisting on minimum wage are among the most vulnerable to the effects of the Republican sequestration policy, which is now in effect. It is I'd say sequestration starts with S, which stands for stupid. It is a stupid, mindless, lacking of common sense policy that we're pursuing. The sequester cuts to social services and to programs that foster opportunities for working families and the middle class are making it even harder for our lowest paid workers and their families. The effects of the sequester on those who are struggling to make ends meet at the lowest income levels remains a focus of the task force launched earlier this year, and I'm pleased that she's in the room, and I want to congratulate her. Barbara Lee and I want to fight for the middle class. But what we want to really do is not only fight for the middle class, but to make the middle class a lot larger by bringing those that are not in the middle class but aspire to be in the middle class into the middle class. And Congresswoman Lee, I congratulate you on your leadership and your courage and your energy that you are devoting to this effort. She is heading up the Democratic Whip's Task Force on Poverty and Opportunity. She's been working on finding ways to make sure every American is able to afford and access the opportunities that make Americans' dream a reality. I'm eager to hear from the witnesses today. I'm going to stay here as long as I can as they share their stories with the committee, and I thank them for speaking out about the hardships they and their families are facing as a result of stagnant wages and federal contracting prices. I am a strong supporter of Davis-Bacon. What Davis-Bacon says is, yes, we're going to issue contracts. Yes, we're going to build buildings, but we're going to make sure that we do not build those buildings at a price that simply pays workers less than they need to have to support themselves and their families. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you. And I notice that I am ending just right on time because our leader is here, and I know she wants to make a statement as well.
Thank you, and without requiring no introduction, but certainly with the gratitude of the members that are here at this hearing, let me ask our leader, Nancy Pelosi, for her opening comments, and thank you very much, Leader.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, my colleagues, our special guests who are here, Amy and Reverend Hayes and Julianne. Where's Julian? Julian, where's your? Where's someplace? Julian Malveau from San Francisco, Vilma Martinez, Antonio Pascual, and Melissa Roseborough. Welcome. And again, it's my pleasure to join my colleagues on this very important subject. And I thank you. I thank you for holding this hearing. It's as important to us as anything that relates to our democracy. Because what we're talking about here, income disparity, inequality in recognizing the value of work, can do more to undermine the middle class and therefore undermine our democracy. It is absolutely almost to the point of immoral the attitude that some have toward the workforce and what the recognition of the contribution of the workforce toward productivity. In the interest of time, I will stick to my notes because this subject gets all of us to a place where we can speak all day about it, and others will need to be speaking as well. So Congressman Grijalva, Congressman Ellison, the distinguished whip, Mr. Hoyer, our champion for Make It in America, as well as for federal employees and public employees, as you heard. Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you, with Congresswoman Schakowsky, with Congressman Pocan, with Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro has done so very, very much. Congressman Cicilline, Congresswoman Lee, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. Thank you all for being here. Okay, so why I say that this is nothing less is at stake in this debate than our own democracy is because there are those in our country who have decided they're going to have a departure from recognizing the role of workers and valuing it. We have consequential choices that we must make, and we must engage the public to be involved in the enormous challenges for our country, for our economy, for our families, for our democracy. Rosa DeLauro had at her home a very special guest, Hedrick Smith, who wrote a book, Who Killed the American Dream? And if you haven't read it, everyone should, because it captures the challenge as well as the statements of those who know about this in a very particular way. In fact, when you read the book, you'll say, I could have written this book myself, right? I've seen this. And in the book, he says that in the 1970s, CEOs made about 40 times the average worker. Today, by the same measure of the same companies and the rest, the average CEO makes around 350 times the average worker. Now, in that period of time, before it used to be that there would be worker pay, CEO pay, and productivity, and they would all go up sort of like this. The CEO made a lot more, but they all rose at the same rate. Now we have a right angle. Productivity is still going up. Workers are not getting the reward, and CEOs are. And one of the reasons that is that if you go back 40 years ago when it was 40 times, the chairman of the board of Standard Oil of New Jersey, Frank Abrams was his name, he said, stakeholder capitalism, that is what we have. The job of management is to maintain an equitable and working balance between the claims of the variously directly affected interest groups, stockholders, employees, customers, and the public at large. And if you go that route, you have some element of fairness, of a sense of community. Since that time, we have shareholder capitalism, which means we're only concerned about the bottom line to the shareholder, not the workers, not the customers, not the community at large. And so the CEO gets paid the more the shareholders make, and the shareholders sometimes make more by firing employees. This flies in the face of what a country and an economy is supposed to be about. In the Bible on corporate managers in the early 80s, In Search of Excellence, Thomas Peterson and Robert Waterman Jr. wrote, only when we look at excellent companies do we see full employment policies in time of recession carrying runs in the veins of managers of these institutions. And that is reinforced by the general manager of General Electric at that time. He said, managers of employee benefits on the link between corporate success and worker security. Corporate success and worker security. Maximizing employment security is a primary goal of a company. The employee who can plan his economic future with reasonable certainty is the employer's most productive asset. What happened to all of that? What happened to all of that? What happened to all of that was shareholder capitalism. Some of these same people who make all this money are just the same ones who fight us on raising the minimum wage. They're some of the same people who want to undermine the National Labor Relations Board. They're some of the same people who who want us to reduce the deficit by cutting investments in education, unemployment insurance, food stamps, but don't touch my assets. I don't want to pay any more taxes, but I want the deficit reduced. And these people on food stamps, why are they there? They're there to subsidize the low wages that you are paying in order to make all the big money that you are making in your company. And that is undermining the middle class, the hopes and dreams of the middle class and everyone who aspires to be in it. People making the minimum wage, 2 family earners and a family of 4 qualify for food stamps. It's not enough money to put food on the table. And they resent it, want to cut it, do so in the Farm Bill, and don't want their taxes to. It's just not fair. So again, you'll think I will go on forever on this, but it's just something that is a national challenge that we must address. The people are hurting. The policy is bad. We know that. You have to help us convey this to the general public, because their jobs, their pensions, their children's education, their dreams of homeownership are all affected by this. Now, no less a person than Aristotle, how many thousands of years ago is that? He said, "It is manifest that the best political community is formed by citizens of the middle class, and that those states that are likely to be well administered are those in which the middle class is large and strong." So the middle class and everybody who wants to be, aspires to be in it. That is the backbone of a democracy. That is at risk with this income disparity. And I thank you for holding this hearing to put on the record the challenges that we face. I just wanted to share some thoughts with you on the subject, and I want to thank you for the role that you are playing to call the public's attention to the fact that work must be rewarded, people must be respected. All of it is, and I'll just close this one point. When they want to cut education, that is, with stiff competition, one of their dumbest ideas. Because nothing, if they want to reduce the deficit, let's cut education. No, nothing brings more money to the Treasury to reduce the deficit than investing in the education of the American people, whether they're little babies, early childhood, K through 12, college, beyond, lifetime learning for our workers. That's what brings money to the Treasury. And we have to change this debate about what all this is about. But we cannot continue to tolerate a situation where this continues to just be bigger and bigger gap. So for these and other reasons, I thank Mr. Ellison and Mr. Grijalva and the members of the Progressive Caucus for holding this hearing today. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Leader. And let me turn to the first panel and ask Mr. Fabian if you would please introduce the guest, and you're going to serve as your name for the record and all that.
So the first panelist is Melissa Roseborough, who works
Push this
at,
button.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Yes. The first worker that's going to give some remarks is Melissa Roseborough.
Thank you. Ms. Roseborough?
Green light will come on.
Press the button for the green light.
First of all, I would like to thank Okay, this one, okay. First of all, I'd like to give honor to my Lord Jesus Christ on this day. My name is Melissa Roseborough, and today I went on strike. I made this sacrifice to send the president a clear message. People are suffering. I work 35 hours every week at McDonald's, located inside the Air Space Museum. I only make $8.33 an hour with no benefits. It's tough to survive on so little, especially since I still support my son and help my daughter and my grandkids. Every pay period, I'm forced to decide which bill I can pay full or just pay a little on it. I simply cannot afford to pay all my bills completely on time. I even have to turn to food stamps for a little extra help because I just don't make enough. The toughest part, though, is when my grandkids ask me to buy them things and I have to tell them Grandma isn't able. I'm not unique. There are millions of low-wage contractors, workers like me who work hard every day on behalf of Americans but struggle to pay basic bills like rent, electric, water, gas, phone, and transportation. The hundreds of workers who went on strike today want the president to take a stand for us. We want him to make sure federal contractors don't go to companies that keep people in poverty. We want him to sign an executive order and give federal contract workers a raise. This is my truth. I believe if workers stand together, we will have victory. I believe, and the workers here today believe. Thank you again for this opportunity.
The second worker that's going to give testimony is Antonio Venegas, who's going to speak in Spanish, and I'm going to provide interpretation in English.
Mi nombre es Antonio Vanegas Pascual.
My name is Antonio Vanegas Pascual.
Trabajo en el restaurante Ronald Reagan Quick Pita, un building federal.
Can I suggest you just leave the mic with you?
I work at Quick Pita in the food court at the Ronald Reagan building. I do many jobs. I cook, I clean, and I serve as a cashier.
Trabajo casi 12 horas diarias sirviendo almuerzo a los funcionarios públicos que trabajan en el edificio.
I work nearly 12 hours every day, serving lunch to the government officials who work in the building.
Pero no estoy aquí para contarles lo mucho que trabajo, estoy aquí para decirles que mi empleador no respeta la ley.
But I'm not here to tell you how hard I work. I'm here to tell you that my employer does not follow the law.
Por los primeros 2 años que trabajé en Cuipita solo gané $6.50 por hora.
For the first 2.5 years I worked at Quick Pita, I only earned $6.50 an hour.
Que están bajo el salario mínimo legal de la ley de Washington, D.C.
Which is under the legal minimum wage in Washington, D.C.
Recientemente, después de que me involucré en la campaña Nación de Buenos Trabajos, el propietario elevó mi salario a $9 la hora.
Recently, after I became involved in the Good Jobs Nation campaign, the owner raised my pay to $9 an hour.
A pesar de trabajar más de 60 horas a la semana, nunca se me ha pagado horas extras.
Even though I work more than 60 hours a week, I don't get any overtime.
Hay muchos trabajadores en ese edificio que trabajan con condiciones como yo. No ganamos lo suficiente para pagar renta, para poner comida sobre la mesa y cuidar de nuestras familias.
There are many workers in the food court who are like me. We don't make enough money to pay the rent, put food on the table, and take care of our families.
Es por ello que estoy aquí. Estas son las razones por lo que tantos trabajadores como yo están hoy en huelga. Queremos que el gobierno federal sea un buen propietario y alquile estos espacios comerciales a empleadores que sigan la ley.
That's why I'm here, and why so many workers like me are on strike today. We want the federal government to be a good landlord and rent prime retail space to employers who follow the law.
Queremos que el gobierno dirija con ejemplo y garantice que todos los empleados que trabajan en nombre del gobierno federal ganen un salario digno y lícito.
We want the government to lead by example and guarantee that all workers who do work on behalf of the federal government earn a legal and living wage. Thank you.
First of all, Mr. Fabian, let me thank you. Change to Win, and the campaign entirely for. I was very honored to join you this morning at Ronald Reagan when the people came out. Very emotional and very truthful, and I want to congratulate and extend my appreciation to every one of the workers that were there. The risk and the courage necessary is beyond words, and those of us that don't have to take that kind of a risk sometimes don't appreciate what they put at stake. So thank you very much, and let me turn to any of the colleagues that might have any questions for the workers. Mr. Kowski, please. Thank you. Rosa?
All I have to say really is shame on us. The report that we're dealing with today is just so shameful that 2 million people like yourselves that work for the federal government earn $12 or less, and in some cases, the federal government is breaking the law. Thank you so much for bringing these stories to our attention, for your courage in doing this strike. I am sure that I speak for everyone on this panel that we take your words to heart and will spread the word among our colleagues and try to do something about it. This is just terrible. So good luck to you. Thank you for your activism and your leadership. Thank you. I don't have a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I really do want to say a thank you to you, Keith, and to you, Congressman Grijalva, Congressman Ellison, to my colleagues here today, but to the Progressive Caucus for fighting the battles on behalf of people in this nation and families in this country. I think, and I want to say thank you to you. You know, we speak all the time, and but your courage of being here today and talking about your own personal stories, we're so grateful for, because without that kind of testimony, we're not going to move to do what is the right thing. So that your voices, you need to know that speaking up is so critically important to how we can turn this whole issue of the inequality around, and how we need to make the agencies of this government enforce the rules and the regulations, as it has to do with overtime, as it has to do with wages. We have to increase the minimum wage, and it's more than $9 an hour, and I would say that to the president if he were sitting where you are. There's a bill here that's $10.10. We need to move on the minimum wage, because it is that ability that will, that economic ability that will give you the wherewithal to take care of your families, to do what you want to do, raise your kids, give them a great education, and pay your taxes, and be on your way to economic security for you and your family. That's our job. We need your voices.
Holmes Norton, and then.
First of all, I just want to say to the workers who have come to the hearing today, I thank you even more for taking your struggle to the streets today. By taking considerable risk, you are now in the vanguard of a lot of rhetoric that nobody's done anything about until you did what you did today. All this talk about the 99%, like all the rest of us are the 99%, and there's the 1% up there. Well, who's doing anything about it? Well, the middle class isn't doing anything about it. You did something about it today at greater risk to yourself than many others would have had to take. And I want to thank you for making all of this visible so that it has to be confronted. Now today, I know some of you, I've been to the Ebenezer Coffee House where you often meet. I know that you have been thinking of ways to engage in this struggle with our co-chair, Keith Ellison. I was at Union Station where, yes, we spoke, but the featured speakers were people like our witnesses today who spoke for themselves about the conditions that you confront and that the federal government has distanced itself from. If you worked in these same federal buildings in my district, in the Ronald Reagan building, in the Union Station, in the Smithsonian, in the Air and Space Museum, if you worked directly for those agencies, you would be paid a decent wage. But the federal government has outsourced your labor and is trying to distance itself from responsibility for your low wages and for the fact that most of you have no benefits whatsoever. Now, this is not only inhumane, for the federal government, it is particularly dumb because many of you will require what we call benefits for the working poor because your employer has failed to pay a decent wage with benefits. So who picks up the tab? The federal government, of course. So even if the federal government didn't care about you, you would think that the federal government, which is deep into deficit cutting now, would want to do something about who really should be paying the decent wage and paying for these benefits. Yes, the president mentioned the state of, and I'm very pleased he did because he set a very important tone by calling for a wage, an increase in the minimum wage. We know that a minimum wage, by the way, the report today was that the District of Columbia, for example, was number 9 in the country in the cost of living. So thank you very much for an increase in the minimum wage. What we want is a decent wage, a livable wage. That's the only thing, it seems to me, that will get us So today I am circulating a letter among my colleagues. I'm going to circulate it throughout the House, trying to get very specific with the president about what should be done. Yes, I agree with those who have generally called for an executive order. That's the very thing to do. But I can tell you as a lawyer, the first thing that happens when you call for an executive order is they pass it to the lawyers who keep it for a year to study it. So yes, the president could change this by executive order. But there's something the president could do tomorrow that is in existence right now. In order to get the benefit of being sheltered in an iconic structure like Union Station or like the Air and Space Museum, your employers had to compete with others who wanted to provide the same service for the federal government. What the president could do tomorrow would be to use the present system, which gives points for various ways in which the federal government believes it benefits if this contractor or that contractor, in fact, receives the contract. If points were given for a living wage without passing the costs on to the taxpayer, then of course it seems to me that would give that competitor a leg up in trying to get one of these valued spots in these federal buildings where you work. We can't allow, what the letter also calls on the president to do is to immediately set up a working group of the various federal agencies who let these contracts out to advise him on the executive order, on adjusting the point system that I have just discussed, so that you would get points for paying a living wage, so that in the very near future, and I would say before the end of this year, we could see some action from the President of the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our co-chairs for calling this important hearing and thank our leader and our whip for being here. Thank and acknowledge Barbara Lee for chairing the Democratic Caucus on Poverty and Opportunity. But most importantly, thank the witnesses for your testimony today. As Congresswoman Schakowsky said, this is a national disgrace. When you consider the hard work that you do and the idea that in this country, no one should work full-time, work hard, and live in poverty, period. And to really think of the irony that you are working in some of the most important buildings in the richest, most powerful, most prosperous country on the planet, and that you are being required to work at wages which are not wages you can support a family on and live with dignity and decently. And we have a responsibility to fix this. I commit to you that we're going to work very hard to make sure that we do. I just want to say thank you for your courage in bringing this to the attention of the American people, because I think most people would be horrified to learn the wages that you are being paid in important buildings all across this city and would feel a deep sense of responsibility to fix it. I want to finally conclude by thanking Amy Traub and Robert Hilton Smith for this really spectacular report that I hope everyone in America will read and that will force us to take action to reverse this immoral set of circumstances. So thank you again, and I know we're all going to work hard to fix this.
Thank you, sir. Any comment?
Well, let me first thank all of our members and especially our co-chairs for your this very important work and for your tremendous leadership to Congressman Ellison and Grijalva with regard to the Progressive Caucus. This is the only caucus really that I believe has taken this issue on head on, and so I just have to thank all of our members for that. Let me just welcome you. Thank you very much for being here, and just say how brave and courageous you are, because it's street heat. That's what it's going to take. But all of you are very bold in leading this street heat, and I think you're not only going to change the conditions that you're talking about and that you have to live under and work under, but you're going to change this for a lot of people in our country. And so for that, I have to thank you very much. Income inequality is a moral issue. It's an economic issue, yes, but it's also a moral issue, and it speaks to the heart of who we are as a country, and it's shameful what is taking place. When you look at the fact, and members have referred to our task force, and I want to thank all of our members for their support and for being part of this task force on poverty and opportunity, but when you look at the fact that people who are working are falling into the ranks of the poor now. The ranks of the poor are increasing. We have 50 million people now, 17 million children are poor, and yet many are working. And as Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton mentioned in terms of the government paying on the back end, but the big problem now that our government is cutting. We're cutting the safety net, cutting food stamps by $20 billion, cutting Head Start, cutting HUD, Section 8. And so this safety net is not even going to be there for people who are low-wage workers. And so we've got to take this on head on. And a living wage is where we need to get. I come from California. $25, $26 an hour is what a living wage would be. Yeah, in California. And so, $10, $9, $10, okay, we need to start somewhere, but let me tell you, we got to get past this. If we're going to ensure the American dream for everybody, and it's got to be more than $10 an hour. Finally, I have to say that greed is driving a lot of this issue in terms of income inequality. When you look at CEO compensation and what that has been over the last 10 years, it's outrageous. It's unfair, and many members have legislation
we've introduced legislation around CEO compensation. But one of my bills, and I want to, Mr. Chairman, just call this to your attention, is I don't believe, and I have legislation that does this, that companies should be able to deduct, companies should not be able to deduct their get a tax deduction if they pay their CEOs 25 times more than the lowest wage worker. The federal government, taxpayers should not be paying for this CEO compensation. And so they should not be paying for it. And so let me just thank you for being here. We all are with you in this struggle, but we're so, I guess, so pleased to see this movement now taking place, because so many of us, you know, understand the 99% and the 1% of the Occupy movement, but you've taken it to the next step, to the real step, and you're going to make it real for the entire country. So thank you again. Really wonderful to see everybody here.
Mr. Pecan, any questions or comments?
Well, and I also would like to thank you for being here today. I'd like to thank the Progressive Caucus for putting this together. I am from Wisconsin, so Milwaukee is one of the cities that also had a strike, and we really appreciate that. It's a way to get the word out about this. There is no question when listening to your testimony. I grew up in a lower middle class family in Wisconsin. When you talk about what you're making, that's $1,263 a month at 35 hours a week at $8.33 an hour. And there is no way that is even close to what your efforts are worth for the job you're doing. And there's too many people in that spot in this country. And we had a living wage campaign in Madison, Wisconsin. I co-chaired to try to raise that wage significantly more. But we need to do something about that. My mother is 84 years old. She gets $1,101 a month in Social Security, and I've gone through all of her bills with her. I don't know how you do it. And if I had a hat, I would tip it to you for somehow you're getting by. But what the real answer is, we need to raise the awareness of this issue to the point that the president can sign that executive order and do the right thing. And we're completely behind you. And thank you so much for all you're doing to get the word out. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Let me thank the panelists and invite the next panel up. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And let me turn the next part of the meeting over. Let me turn the next part of the meeting over to my colleague and one of the principal architects of this Progressive Caucus's deep involvement in a jobs campaign, and now this campaign to assure that low-wage workers do not remain low-wage workers. I want to turn that over to my colleague and co-chair, Mr. Ellison, for the remainder of the meeting.
Thank you, Congressman Grijalva. And now we'll ask the next panel to come on. We have a distinguished panel, but I just want to amplify what the co-chair Grijalva said. You know, this is not a one and done. What you should know, we've been in communication with the Democratic Caucus about continuing this issue, and we have a jobs tour, which is going to begin like June 22nd at the Netroots Nation in San Jose, California, and it's going to march across this country, including right here. We're going to keep on this issue of good jobs now. Our first panelist is Dr. Julianne Malveaux. Dr. Malveaux is a respected labor economist, noted author, colorful commentator. And Julianne Malveaux has long been recognized for her progressive and insightful observations. The 15th president of Bennett College, America's oldest historic black college for women, Dr. Malveaux has been hailed by the likes of Cornel West as, quote, the most iconoclastic public intellectual in the country. Right. Armed with a PhD in economics from MIT, Dr. Malveaux is shaping public opinion in 21st century America through her contributions to the public dialogue on issues such as race, culture, gender, and economic prosperity for working people. Well-versed in today's economic issues, Dr. Malveaux offers an expert analysis on economic events such as the Great Recession. Thank you, Dr. Malveaux. Next, we have Dr. Frederick D. Haynes III, who is Dr. Frederick D. Haynes is a passionate leader, captivating orator, educator, activist, engaged in fighting against racial injustice, committed to increasing economic and social justice in urban areas, and devoted to transforming the lives of the disenfranchised. for over 25 years. Dr. Haynes, serving as a senior pastor at Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, has innovatively led and grown the ministry of 500 members to 12,000, and his out-of-the-box approach to ministry reaches across generations, class, ethnicities, providing a relevant and functional truth that can be applied every day. Dr. Haynes' presence here is particularly important because as we work hard to improve and increase the economic fortunes of all Americans, we got to understand that our workers are not just units of production, but whole people,
Right.
and children of God
Right.
in my mind, and he's speaking to that moral imperative to pay the people right. A workman's worth is higher. Is that right, Reverend?
That's it.
We also have Christian Dorsey, who's the Director of External and Government Affairs at the Economic Policy Institute. The Progressive Caucus is particularly indebted to the Economic Policy Institute for your long-term assistance with us on our budget. The last one is the Back to Work to budget. Thank you so much for your help. Christian Dorsey joined EPI in 2008. Christian's work at EPI is to build grassroots awareness of economic policy matters with a goal of educating and mobilizing communities to advocate more effectively on their own behalf and to advance EPI's policy initiatives with federal law and policy makers. Prior to becoming to EPI, Christian serves as Chief Executive Officer for nonprofit organizations promoting children's literacy, prejudice reduction, affordable housing, and he's seen and read widely across the American media. Finally, we're very honored to have Amy Traub, who's a senior policy analyst for Demos. Amy joined Demos in 2011, serves as senior policy analyst. She has a broad research focus on consumer debt, job quality, job creation, and policies to build the American middle class. Prior to joining Demos, Amy worked for the Drum Major Institute for Public Policy, where she authored a number of influential reports, including Principles for an Immigration Policy to Strengthen and Expand the American Middle Class, and played a key role in the policy analysis incorporated into the middleclass.org, a site now operated by the Progressive Punch and the Campaign for America's Future. So starting us off will be Dr. Melvo. Dr. Melvo, the floor is yours.
Congressman, I want to thank you and your co-chair at the Congressional, let me see, can y'all hear me? I could holler. At the Congressional Progressive Caucus for calling this hearing. I think it's really important. I'm not sure who I should call my Congresswoman, either Congresswoman Norton, because I live in the district, or Congresswoman Lee, because I'm from California. But let me just greet and say thank you to all of you for this opportunity. You have my printed testimony, and I'm going to do my best to stick to it. But first of all, before I say anything, I just want to thank the workers. I'm really humbled. I'm really humbled to be there with them. They're basically taking their lives in their hands. Right. All too often we talk about people who don't earn enough. It's a patriarchal kind of thing for us to talk about them. And so I think it's really important for them to talk about them, for us to hear their stories, how they're living, and why we can make a difference. And one of the questions we might ask with this sequestration is, why was it so important to keep TSA working, but not so important to keep Head Start, food stamps, and these folks making reasonable wages? I fly more than I walk, but I would rather stand in line half an hour longer if somebody could get $1 more an hour. And I think many of us feel that way. Now, before continuing with my formal testimony, I also want to tell you all a story. About 2 years ago, I was hospitalized. And I didn't know I was going to be hospitalized. I went to the doctor to get a checkup, and they said, "Oh, no, we got to keep you." So they sent a little old lady down to get me in a wheelchair. Well, I don't believe in wheelchairs. I wasn't that sick, but I guess that's a hospital law. The lady looked like my mama. I mean, she was old. And I said, "Sister, you're an elder. I'm not going to have you wheel me. Can I, wheel you?" And she said, "No, I'll lose my job." So I said, "Let me run down the corridor and you meet me down there, and we can work it out from there." Well, I asked her, I said, "How old are you?" She said 72. I asked you why she was still working. She said she needed the money. I asked her if there was mandatory retirement. She said no. And finally, she told me that she had no benefits. So this woman was working as a nurse's aide in a hospital in the North Carolina area, wheeling around people who look like me while basically almost limping around herself. This is what we have to deal with, and this is what we have to fix. So the work that Demos has done, I think, is exceptional. I know that Amy will speak to it, but I think it's really important to look at the issues that Demos has raised about those contracted workers who are not making a reasonable wage. I think we might also ask ourselves, as these brothers and sisters have asked us today, what would happen if they didn't show up?
Right.
What would stop if they didn't show up? There was a play in the 1960s called Days of Absence, in which African American people would not show up to deal with their work. Now, just what happens if these workers don't show up? So, a couple of things. Right now, the $12 an hour, which we're considering low-wage work, gives you $25,000 a year. If these workers have even one child, they are living at or below the poverty line. Their limited wages create a cycle of disadvantage for their children. As summer looms, we know that children who are in summer programs will be better prepared when they return to school in the fall. Yet those with income limitations will find it difficult to pay fees that range from $50 to $125 a week for summer enrichment programs. This cycle of disadvantage means that low wages yield more limited opportunities for students who, before their parental situation, might be exposed to the kind of opportunities that would make them more competitive for college. It's ironic that this administration has supported a race to the top in education, but a race to the bottom in terms of job creation. Too many Americans have been forced to take low-wage jobs in order to survive. Those over 50 have experienced downsizing that has moved them into retail jobs that pay minimum wage. New college graduates have been pushed back into their parents' home into low-wage jobs because there's little else available. Even those who are able to find a decent job find their wages lower because competition for good jobs is fierce. Indeed, many take unpaid internships to make them more capable or competitive for future jobs, working at night or on the weekends to supplement their wages. Those who begin their careers with unemployment or low-wage work are subject to something that economists call wage scarring, which means they never catch up from the disadvantage they started with. The low-pay current situation is compounded by the reduced bargaining power when they find their first career-related job. In addition, these young people have incurred debt as they seek work, worsening their financial position, an effort to create well-paid jobs and investment in our nation's future. Contributing to job scarcity is the insistence by employers, supported by the Senate and House of Representatives, that there are labor shortage in high-tech industries that justify the expansion of the H-1B visa, and as included in the pending immigration bill. While I do not doubt that there are thousands of high-skilled potential immigrant workers, I submit there are also thousands of domestic workers, especially workers of color, who are qualified for the jobs where shortages are asserted. HBCU graduates are more likely than others to major in computer sciences. Have they been considered in the Silicon Valley industries? I see the time chart, but I just got a few more minutes. Thank you so much for reminding me that I'm long-winded. Economists are suggesting that we are in an economic expansion, not a recession, with a 2.5% GDP growth last quarter. But there's been little trickle down from the top to the bottom. Workers are so vulnerable now and have little bargaining power. They take what they can get because there's nothing else. The federal government can help or hurt these workers depending on how they choose to protect them with minimum wage legislation, with regulation on contractors, with requirements to make health care and other social protections available. We have 7.6 Americans working part-time for economic reasons. They work full-time if they could find a job. Additionally, according to Demos, we have millions of workers who work full-time and are paid low wages, thanks to federal contracting policy. This is how it works. If we take the lowest bid, workers will earn the lowest wage. When contractors bid on federal contracts, our government needs to specify that a living wage and benefits are part of the contract, so that instead of bidding lowest wage, we bid lowest wage or lowest bid with competitive wages. It's a very small adjustment, Congresswoman Norton, as you suggested, to ensure that people who work with contractors are getting paid well. Meanwhile, contracting executives earn 6 or 7 figure salaries, which suggests that they are exploiting the workers who earn poverty wages. The trend to underpay workers is pervasive in our economy. Workers are so desperate for employment, they'll take anything. We affront the dignity of workers, undermine our national principles. We decide that it's acceptable that those who work for federal government deserve substandard pay. I am especially concerned about private household workers, home health workers, and other in the hospital services industry, because these are mostly women, and predominantly black and brown women, who take care of our sick, our infirm, and our elders. How can we expect these workers to offer the highest quality care? We're not offering them the highest quality wages. These are women who bring chips of ice to women who are dying, women who hold a hand and say a prayer to someone who needs comfort. These are women who rub the feet and massage the heads of those who are in pain, and many of them earn the minimum wage and cannot focus on their work for their worries about their own economic survival. I'm going to skip ahead in the interest of time, but I think all of you do have the written testimony. Let me just close by asking what we want to think about. What is a living wage? The president has asked to move it up to $9 an hour. That will be $18,720 a year if people working full-time, full year. The $725 that we currently deal with is $15,080 dollars a year. Senator Elizabeth Warren says, as proposed, a $22 an hour pay, which translates into $44,000 a year. Many may find that excessive, but when people are living in major metropolitan areas, this is not an excessive wage. I would urge this Congressional Progressive Caucus to start at the top, at the $22 an hour, and negotiate downwards as opposed to starting at the bottom to attempt to negotiate upwards. What we know is that our society has contempt for working people, and this contempt has been reinforced by the way that federal contracting employers have been treated. So again, thank you for the opportunity to share with you. Forgive me, young lady who was flashing me the sign if I exceeded your time, but please let me say that again, I'm humbled and honored to be with you and happy to be of assistance at any time.
And I'm Frederick Douglass Haynes III. I am the senior pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. I also serve as the chairman of the board of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Pastors and Leaders Conference, which is ably led by Dr. Ivor Carruthers, who I want to appreciatively acknowledge, who was in the house this morning. In just a few months, the nation is going to pause to celebrate and commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Great March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Most of the attention will focus on the poetic, prophetic brilliance of the drum major for justice as he closed out his message in a real sense, engaging in creativity as a preacher, saying, "I have a dream," pushed by Mahalia Jackson. However, that was not in his original script. The amazing thing is we forget it was a march for jobs and justice. And Martin Luther King Jr. spent 1963 through 1968 not just articulating his dream, but declaring there is a nightmare that we must fight against. And we are here today to basically say that we want to end the nightmare of low-wage workers who basically every single month find themselves having to make decisions that most of us can't even identify with. Decision: should I pay this bill or should I eat? Should I get this medication or should I give my child an allowance to get what they need for school? Decisions that really are immoral. I love the fact, Mr. Chair Keith Ellison, that you said that this is a moral issue. It's a moral issue because Moses even said, as the people of God were about to inhabit the promised land, do not take advantage of poor hired workers. He said that is an immoral issue. And so in this land where we often refer to ourselves as the light on a hill, in this land where we call ourselves exceptional, we are exceptional, unfortunately, at perpetuating a moral evil of exploiting our low-wage workers. And so we have the greedy who are enriched and the needy who are exploited. And so before we jump on I Have a Dream, let's not forget the nightmare that Dr. King talked about. And so I'm basically saying thank you to the Progressive Caucus for being a voice for the voiceless, for rendering visible those who have been invisible in this nation. And the beautiful thing is our best days can be ahead of us as a country if if we recognize that God Almighty honors a country when you recognize an economy is not grown from the top down, but from the bottom up. And the bottom line is that oftentimes, one of the scriptures that is edited out of the Bible of right-wing conservatives is the scripture where Jesus judges not individuals but nations on how we treat the least of these. It's nations that he's talking about in Matthew chapter 25. And if you let me remix what Jesus may well say to the United States of America, he will say, I was hungry, but because you didn't pay me a living wage, I did not have enough food to eat. I was thirsty. I couldn't afford bottled water like you have here at this particular symposium because I did not make a living wage. And the United States is going to pietistically say, Lord, when did we do this? He'll say, inasmuch as you did it to these low-wage workers, you've also done it unto me. Until there is liberty and justice for all and not just y'all up at the top, it's not going to be the kind of nation that we call ourselves being. And so I thank you again for being a voice to the voiceless and making the invisible know that their concerns are being visibilized. And this is just the beginning. We're going to keep on coming and declare no justice, no peace.
I guess I drew the short straw to follow Dr. Haynes. Let me just say thank you, Mr. Ellison, for inviting me to testify today on the dimensions of income inequality, which a very specific piece is being highlighted in today's hearing. But of course, this is a problem that sadly is much bigger than that. I have three essential points to convey today. One, inequality is disturbingly high. Two, policy decisions have driven this rise in inequality. And three, reversing high and rising inequality is an imperative not just for equity, but also for the future vibrancy and the competitiveness of this country.
Right.
Now, that inequality is high and rising is a defining, albeit perverse, feature of our economy, and it has been really for the last 3 decades, where an overwhelmingly disproportionate share of our nation's income growth goes to the top 1% of all income earners. And when we examine market-based incomes from 1979 to 2007, we find that the top 1% has claimed nearly 60% of the nation's income growth, well over 6 times that of the entire 90% combined. Now, some of that is explained because during this time, a lot of our income is shifted to capital income, which is disproportionately held by the rich. But that doesn't tell the whole story. Even when we look at labor income or wages, we see that the wages for the top 1% have grown at 9 times the rate as the bottom 90%. And this has real consequences, members of the caucus, for those at the middle and the lower ends of the income distribution. As they find housing increasingly unaffordable, they are more food insecure, and they are unable to save adequately for their own retirement. And what makes all of this perverse is that there has been enough growth in national income, which if distributed more equitably, would have more than produced increased living standards for everybody. And I can put a number on it. If middle-class incomes had risen at the overall rate of growth over the last 30 years, America's middle class would be earning around $19,000 more per year. Now, that idea that income growth could be equitably shared across the population is not some abstract progressive ideal. From 1947 until the late 1970s, we saw exactly that, equitable income growth, which begs the very real question, what happened? Well, it's my conclusion that policy decisions have driven the growth in inequality. Our nation's economic policy has served the interests of those who accrue the most income and who hold the most wealth, because it is those who are able to exert the most political power. Now, there have been choices that have been made and failures to act that have contributed to this policy malpractice. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll just list a few. One, we've talked about it already. Policymakers have allowed inflation to erode the value of the minimum wage. which can be looked at in no other terms as providing a subsidy for businesses while absorbing the costs of doing what they should be doing themselves through the wages that they provide their workers. 2, policymakers have accelerated the integration of the United States into the global economy without adequately ensuring that U.S. workers can compete fairly with foreign labor. And on top of that, we provide incentives for companies, for U.S. multinationals to offshore jobs and resources. Policymakers have systematically deregulated industries and sectors, putting downward pressures on wages, creating vulnerability for consumers, and implicitly encouraging recklessness, that has proven quite devastating. Our tax code doesn't raise adequate revenue for the needed public investments, and we maintain this upside-down system where we subsidize the mortgage interest payments, the charitable deductions, and the retirement savings of wealthy people as opposed to low-income folks. And policymakers have aided and ignored the erosion of bargaining power for U.S. workers, which has led to rampant increases in executive pay disparity and a decrease in the share of jobs that we have that pay living wages and benefits. Right. Now, I'm going to close by saying that I identified $19,000 as the cost of inequality for middle-class families. But that's not the only cost that we endure. There are other ones as well. Epidemiologists have found that nations that are both rich and highly unequal have poor physical and mental health. They have more crime, they have greater gaps in educational achievement, and they have more distrustful and unengaged communities. Now, I imagine few of you and few of us would want America to be defined in these ways, yet that is the very real cost of the high inequality that we have so long allowed to happen. Now, if I have sounded any alarms today, then I have succeeded. Right. Inequality should be viewed for what it is, an existential threat to the very idea of America and the American dream. Right. We risk becoming a nation where our representative democracy essentially becomes an oligarchy, and where the masses, the engine of our nation's productive capacity, perform far below their potential despite desperately wanting to achieve and to contribute to the highest degree. Thank you very much.
I can take this one too. Thank you. Is it on? Yeah. Thank you, Congressman Ellison and the Progressive Caucus for this chance to provide testimony. In our report, Underwriting Bad Jobs, How Our Tax Dollars Are Funding Low-Wage Work and Fueling Inequality, my colleague Robert Hilton Smith and I analyzed data on federal contractors' health care spending, small business administration loans, federal infrastructure funding, and federal building service property leases. We found that through these sources of federal funding, nearly 2 million private sector workers are employed doing jobs we have decided are worthy of public funding for wages of $12 an hour or less, and in some cases, as we've heard today, quite a bit less, much less. There's no single private sector employer responsible for this many low-wage employees. Yet the United States has a history of working to ensure that our tax dollars provide decent jobs, and that gives me a lot of hope. The Davis-Bacon Act and other prevailing wage laws are a powerful example of this commitment. While these statutes continue to offer important labor protections, we find in our research that federal prevailing wage laws have not succeeded in consistently raising wages above $12 an hour. While we did not track the growth of the publicly funded private sector workforce over time, there are 3 trends that we can see contributing to the current size. The first is the dramatic growth of federal contracting, which doubled between 1996 and 2009, as much work formerly performed by public employees was outsourced to private companies, which, as we've heard, tend to pay much less. Second is the increase in federal health care spending through Medicare and Medicaid, which flows into the private health care system that includes many low-wage employees. Third is the growth of low-wage employment in the private economy overall. Since 2001, the number of low-wage jobs created has outpaced the growth of better-paying work, and this trend has become worse since the recession. Without an effective wage standard to protect workers funded by public dollars, their wages mirror those of the larger private economy, and they mirror this dysfunction that we see in the larger private economy. Low-wage workers funded by our public dollars work in nearly every sector of the economy and every part of the country. For example, and I'll speak about 3 industries here, we find 392,000 low-wage workers employed in home health care services. Personal care aides, this is similar to what Dr. Malveaux was speaking about, personal care aides who assist the elderly or people with disabilities with daily living activities. They earn a median wage of just $8.90 an hour in the home health care services industry. Many low-wage workers in the home health care industry are excluded from minimum wage and overtime laws that protect other workers, and that suppresses wages in this industry as a whole. Yet 2/3 of the home health care services industry is actually supported by federal tax dollars, primarily through Medicare and Medicaid. We also find 60,000 low-wage retail workers supported by public dollars. Now, retail is not a sector we might typically think of as being federally supported, but retailers received $3.7 billion in federal contracts in 2012, supporting an estimated 22,000 low-wage positions. Small Business Administration loans subsidized another 38,000 low-wage retail jobs. Retail cashiers, for example, earn a median wage of just $9.13 an hour. Stock clerks earn $9.80 an hour. And the retail salespeople who make up the bulk of employees in this sector make $10.09 at the median.
Teach!
Widespread practices of involuntary part-time work and unstable scheduling push people's take-home incomes in this sector even lower. I will discuss one more industry, which is transportation equipment manufacturing. On the whole, this is not a low-wage industry. 85% of the employees earn more than $12 an hour. There's skilled work, and there are a lot of workers who are in unions that protect their pay. But with $108.6 billion in federal contracts in 2012, and that's primarily from the military, the footprint of the federal government in this industry is so large that we still find 35,000 federally funded workers across the country in this industry who earn low wages. It's worth noting that this industry is largely in business as a result of taxpayer dollars. In 2012, aerospace manufacturing received 49% of its revenue from federal contracting, while boat and shipbuilders collected 57% of their total revenue from federal contracts. I've referred to home health care, retail, and transportation equipment manufacturing to suggest the diversity of industries and sectors that include low-wage jobs funded by federal dollars, but this is just a small sample of the industries impacted. The low-wage federally funded private sector workforce includes Americans from every region of the country, of every race, and draws from the entire working-age population. In conclusion, I want to note that evidence on the impact of local living wage laws and economic development agreements that incorporate job standards really suggests that the cost to taxpayers does not rise dramatically when workers are paid decent wages, and the Economic Policy Institute has done some of the best research in this area. And I think that's something important to keep in mind today as workers, as we've seen in federal properties around Washington, D.C., are calling for better pay. So thank you for your time.
At this time, I'd like to invite, I don't have a list of who came in first, but I'd like to invite our members to ask the panelists questions. Recognizing Jan Schakowsky of Illinois.
So tell me that last figure that, or maybe you tell me from EPI, that raising the wages of these contract workers does not, what was that statistic that was given? That it doesn't hurt the, what was that last thing you said?
I think there are two things to keep in mind. One is a point that was made earlier that we are really subsidizing low-wage workers, contract workers, twice, because we're first paying for the contracts and then paying again as workers need to get public benefits to support their families. So we're paying, but the second point is that, and I don't, I don't know if you would prefer to speak to this, but looking at the evidence of local living wage laws, often the costs of a contract did not increase. And that's something to keep in mind as the federal government looks to crafting some sort of policy.
Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just briefly to echo what Amy said, EPI has looked at this issue of contracting and what happens when you raise the wage requirement through any one of the numerous mechanisms that Congress has at its disposal, and what we find is that it makes contractors more competitive with each other without having the effect of raising the cost of contracts for taxpayers. So the canard that we'll often hear that anything done in this era will just hurt the federal government by paying a higher rate of contracts is not borne out by the extensive evidence that we've looked at.
You know, the thing that is really disturbing right now, when you look at the jobs figures, just the number of jobs that have been created, it's in the public sector, in the private sector right now. But every month we've seen this decrease in jobs in the public sector that is really holding our economy back. I think the same thing would go for wages. If we are putting more money into the pocket of public sector workers, that we would be able to see that resonate throughout the economy, that we could see our economy really taking off right now. Instead, we're going in the opposite direction with the sequester and all of the budget cuts and this penny pinching, which frankly I really did not know about. Is this also due to increased outsourcing? Were some of these jobs outsourced and previously directly working for the federal government? Can you tell me about outsourcing?
When you decide to freeze or reduce federal employment, but at the same time have the same work done and budgets are not cut significantly, outsourcing is the next place to go. The challenge with that is that you're paying also a lot of overhead. So for example, an IT person who works for the federal government earns about $130,000 a year. The contract cost of that IT worker is about $250,000 a year, or nearly twice as much. Because you're
And the reason for that is?
You're paying overhead. If a company contracts to do this kind of work, they're hiring the person, they're paying the person. They're also paying an overhead for administrative costs and other things like that. Frankly, we'd be better off incorporating
So do we have good numbers on the premium that we're actually paying for outsourcing? Because I think the argument in favor of outsourcing is that that will somehow save the taxpayers money. Do we have good data on the cost of outsourcing?
Something that we can look at a little bit more in depth. You know, the appeal of outsourcing is not just on the immediate wage side, which can be argued that certainly you're paying a higher premium, but it certainly reduces the future liabilities in terms of reduced benefits for pensions, et cetera, that you typically see at the federal level. So that's why the federal government finds it attractive, but I think that's a good, useful area of work for us to look into to just prove that it doesn't provide the bang for the buck that people think it does.
Let me just make a couple of points relevant to this whole discussion. One on income inequality. David K. Johnson, a journalist and on economic issues, says that since 1966, that ordinary workers' wages have risen about $59. If you consider that as an inch, and then you look at how much have the wages of the top 1% grown, it's 884 feet. Taller than a 70-story building compared to an inch. So while we've talked about immorality, and you highlighted that, Reverend, it's also really bad for an economy like ours not to have a true middle class, not to have opportunities for people to move into the middle class in our country. And that will never happen if we rely on low-wage workers. We have to have living wages for our economy to thrive. I mean, even if we drop all of the moral arguments and questions of immorality or not. This is really dangerous for the United States of America, to have low-wage workers, to have this kind of income inequality in our country. We will not be competitive in this world if that is the kind of society that we have. We are doomed if we do that. So this is a very fruitful area, I think, for all of us to be looking at, and a particular responsibility, obviously, since we're looking at federal workers. So thank you.
Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Just to put a point on the point that Representative Chkowski was making, this is a demand economy. It is a consumer-based economy. So the theory is that if you have a huge number of low-income workers, they cannot buy the goods, and people will not make the goods. So you drive the entire economy down if 70% of your economy is consumer-based. These cannot be consumers out here. Therefore, by paying them a low wage, you undermine the economy itself. It's a very important point. To Mr. Dorsey's point, this is very important because what you call the canard is going to be raised. And that is something that we all have to think about ourselves. We're told that what we have to do is to keep prices down, so everything be cheap for us all. We forget that this is a very competitive economy. Now, the point I was making about the point system, for example, to take an example where this could come up. If you want a federal contract, very competitive, extremely competitive. You can bet your bottom dollar that all of the retail and services that the workers in this room work for had to go through a very competitive process to be chosen. Among the issues that was never taken into account was whether they were paying a living wage. In fact, my good friend, Dr. Malboa, has said, the federal government says we want the lowest bidder. The lowest bidder, the federal government is always looking for the lowest bidder, this is how the economy works as well, who will provide the most. So they're not just looking for the lowest bidder. So you can bid low if you are McDonald's, but if Burger King comes in and maybe bids a little higher but gives a great deal more, or is willing to absorb himself some of the cost, he is going to get the contract. So the fact is, if it's competitive, everybody wants to show that he can give the most while costing the government less, which means, to take Mr. Dorsey's point, that in a competitive economy, you don't have to worry about whether they'll raise the cost, because one of the things you have to show is that you can do it without raising the cost. But I would like to ask the panel to go through an exercise that may be even more important. The point has been made that outsourcing has grown geometrically. The growth of the federal contract sector. So we here are talking about the biggest contractor in the world. Contracts for more goods and services than any other entity in the world. Now, I'd like you all to discuss how an entity with that kind of a power could, in fact, lead not only wage increases in its own sector, the federal sector, but in the process, raise income for low and middle income workers across the economy. I'm talking about the ripple effect now. if Burger King or McDonald's raises wages in the Smithsonian, at the National Zoo, at Union Station, at Ronald Reagan, at Air and Space, what will happen to McDonald's and the rest of them, Burger King, in their establishments throughout the United States? How would that work?
Well, Congresswoman Norton, I think you really raised an important question, because the federal government, if you write the appropriate regulations, can pull other people's wages up. In other words, somebody who's going to work at the McDonald's at Air and Space might also work at the McDonald's at 14th and U. But if the one on 14th and U is not paying the same wages as the one at Air and Space.
And I'm asking you, can that last long?
It can, again, with the appropriate regulations. I think, as I mentioned earlier, that the federal government can require contractors to pay a certain wage, so that you're going to get the minimum bid if you pay X number of dollars an hour. So you're basically, we have regulations, as you know, to force contractors to comply with environmental regulations. We force them to comply with other regulations. So we just be forcing them to comply with a wage regulation. Now, conservative economists will tell you that people just won't hire anybody. That would be the argument. Well, if you raise the wage, people will simply not hire anybody. But we have evidence to the contrary. When you look at adjacent states, for example, Massachusetts and New Hampshire raising wages does not cause some rush from people in Massachusetts to go to New Hampshire. Indeed, Massachusetts wages often will rise to meet those in New Hampshire. So it's really a matter of federal leadership. I think that, with all due respect, and certainly not to y'all, but some of your colleagues do believe that you can starve the beast, and the beast would be the poor people. Some of your colleagues believe that, the wealthy are supposed to get more and the rest of us less. We look to the Congressional Progressive Caucus to continue to make these points, but also to begin to insert this into some of the legislation, because when it's inserted into the legislation, you really have a robust dialogue about what our values are. Raising the minimum wage to $9 is nice, but raising it to 15 or 20 would really protect these workers a lot more and would not erode the employment base. The last thing I want to note is that there are 7.6 million workers who work part-time for economic reasons. These are folks who are cobbling together 2 or 3 part-time jobs with no benefits because they don't earn enough money. It's really important for us to look at that whole part-time issue as well, and to figure out how we can help those folks survive.
Well, does anyone want to take on having an effect outside of the federal sector? If, for example, I used Burger King and McDonald's in some buildings here, but I'm assuming that if the president engaged in some kind of point system or otherwise caused a living wage throughout all these contracts in the federal government, that he would have an effect well beyond the federal government. And therefore the income gap that we're speaking, that has been spoken about but done so little of, would begin to close. And that's what I'd also like to have discussed.
I think we would expect to see that effect most powerfully in industries where federal contracting makes up a large proportion of the industry. So I spoke about transportation equipment manufacturing. That's one industry where the federal government is a huge proportion of that, and you would expect to see a change. I think that the same thing would happen with the within healthcare.
Excuse me, Congressman Norton. I've just been advised that we don't have that much time left. I would like to have Congresswoman Lee and Jackson Lee to have some time for questions.
Could I just say before I close then that the contracting power, this is not the first time that the contracting power has been used for the social good. The executive order has been used to fight discrimination for decades now. So this is not a new notion. And I'd also like to say that to the workers in this room, some of you are here at considerable risk. I ask that you report to our caucus if any of you, in fact,
That's right.
find that there is retaliation because of your demonstrations today or because you have come to this hearing.
Thank
I
you, Congressman Lee. Thank you. Congresswoman Lee. Congresswoman Lee.
First, thank
Congresswoman Lee.
all of our.
My apologies from the very beginning.
Okay.
But we got about 5 minutes left, so I need you to go 2.5, 2.5.
2.5, 2. Okay. Just
All right.
thank all of the panelists because all of you have such expertise, experience, and yet you're still really out there fighting for what is right. So I just have to thank all of you. And I'm going to claim Dr. Melville as my constituent. I know Eleanor has already claimed you too. So welcome. On, let me just ask you very quickly. Democrats in our budget put some language in. We got it in saying it's our policy as a national priority to eliminate poverty by beginning to cut it in half in 10 years. That starts with addressing income inequality and low-wage workers. Let me ask you, by requiring, I'd say, a living wage, out of the 50 million people living in poverty, any of you who can answer this, please do. What percentage do you think are low-wage workers out of the 50 million living in poverty? And then secondly, the economic benefits of providing a living wage, given the costs of food stamps, HUD vouchers, Head Start, all of the costs to the government as it relates to providing the safety net for low-wage workers, which once again, the Ryan budget has totally eliminated.
I would be happy to look at the exact numbers, but my off-the-cuff guess would be that about a third of the people who live in poverty are working full-time, full year. That means they're working 35 to 40 hours a week at a low wage, probably without benefits, but perhaps with some. You've got when we look at the poor, we've got to look at the very poor, which are people who earn less than half of the minimum wage. And there is a significant number of people who do that. And then you have a significant number of part-time workers. I think the goal is admirable. And as I said, I'd be happy to get back to you to churn some of the numbers out. But we're looking at least a third who are working full-time.
And then in terms of the costs to the government, in terms of safety net.
Yeah, it's a pretty good calculation. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'll be happy to get back to Chris in your office and make sure he gets it. But you're absolutely right. The having employers actually pay people fair wages would reduce the taxpayer burden in the form of the social safety net. And we looked at this a few years ago in a few states like Mr. Pecan's Wisconsin, and found it was alarming how much we saved on social safety net expenditures that then went into other public investments. It's a remarkable figure, and I'll be happy to get it to you specifically.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thank you.
Congressman Lee is the chair of the Out of Poverty Task Force for the Democratic Caucus. Very important to know. Congressman Jackson Lee, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for this, and thank all the members, and thank my colleague, Congresswoman Lee and Holmes Norton and Akowski and Ellison, but all those who are here. Forgive me, in the Judiciary Committee, they were trying to undo the asbestos litigation, and I was in the middle of a markup, so my apologies to you, but it looks like behind every door there is an attempt to make our lives unequal. I just want to throw something out very quickly, and I think Dr. Melville knows that. Let me go back to hurricane. What a tragedy that we've had today dealing with the tornado. And to all of you who are here, that's what I like. You are compassionate. You are caring. You are here because you are caring, compassion. You have families. And what a tragedy that occurred. But I want to tie that without being disrespectful. And that is Hurricane Katrina. What happened with Hurricane Katrina is the folk who were left behind were the folk who had no means. Over and over again, they said that it came at the end of the month, and those folk who were paid and were impoverished did not have any resources to go anywhere. Here's my question. What damage, what horrible damage are we doing? What can you think of, just to say that it gets on the record, when we continue to let corporate executives go light years beyond either low income, middle income, poor or very poor in terms of income. The income equality, what you're showing, what they're showing, fostered by the federal government, is a catastrophe. Do you have just something you want to put on the record that comes about through poverty that many of these individuals may be facing?
Without being crass and with raising something that we said in the 60s, urban renewal means Negro removal. In other words, what you've seen in New Orleans, in my opinion, is a total reshaping of the, not only the demographic, but social relations. They've taken a class of African-American educators and essentially changed the system from a public school system into essentially a 100% charter system. In addition, as you noted, there were many people who couldn't go anywhere, who had no place to go, no transportation. 35% of the poor in New Orleans had no private transportation. If you looked at the Wall Street Journal in the days after Katrina, you heard people say, this is our opportunity to remake the city. And so people have used those opportunities, or those tragedies, to their own benefit. Lots of public housing has been raised in New Orleans, and at the same time, there have been extraordinary benefits. Economists always talk about compensating differentials. For every bad, there's a good. When we saw foreclosures on homes, you also saw an increase in the number of people who are in the moving business, because clearly people needed help to get out of their homes. And so you saw that sector really skyrocket. So we have to look at who benefits from tragedy and talk about the ways that we can protect those who have been tragically treated. If you go to the Ninth Ward today, Sheila, you know it because you've been there too. They still have those houses with the X's on them.
Absolutely.
How many people, I know a family who everybody in their family lost their home because they were a close-knit family that all lived within blocks of each other. Everybody in their family lost their home.
May I just quickly go to who I claim, Dr. Haynes, I claim you out of Texas.
Thank you
for your testimony. I just wanted to get on the record, Keith, the idea of how tragic poverty can be. And if you could just share something, if anyone else, before my time runs out. That's the only question that I have. Thank you.
And I thank you, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, for your leadership that has always been courageous and prophetic. And I just simply say the lessons of history let us know that the rise and fall of every empire took place from the inside out and not from the outside in. And it had everything to do with the crumbling of that middle class that basically sank into a lower class because of the greedy at the top who basically thought they could make it on the backs of those who are impoverished. And so if this nation wants to continue to sustain itself, it must, in a real sense, lift up those who are at the bottom, because again, we do not have a great nation from the top down, but from the bottom up.
Well, unfortunately, I'm getting the high sign that we got to wrap it up. Let me thank my fellow members of the Progressive Caucus. We had several people come through. It's been an awesome day. I want to thank both panels, particularly all of you who've been here today and done activities at the Union Station today and the Reagan Building. You should know that we have a letter going out in support of the work that you're doing. The Progressive Caucus is going to be pushing for that executive order. We're also very much in support of the work that Eleanor Holmes Norton is doing. She's come up with a wealth of excellent ideas how we might attack this problem. But the main idea is, look, we need the economists, we need the activists, we need the faith leaders, we need the workers, we need everybody to win this fight. And let's not be a 4th of July movement. You know, when we get the fireworks on one day,
right,
then the next day is quiet. We got to figure out a way to go boom, 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 and then boom, and then after that, boom. So, you know, we've got to keep it coming. That's why we're doing the job tour, and we're going to need all y'all help to do it. So let's get out here and raise our people's pay. Thank you all
Keith,
very
can
much.
I just, on the record, thank Eleanor Holmes Norton for your leadership, too.
Great job, you would.
I love that preaching.
Amy,
It's great
always,
to see you.
Always good to see you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
I've been with your colleagues. Okay. I'm not organized. You know what? Freddie knows how to fight.
Thank you, Elder. Good job today.
Whether I know what it was, but you can always look at me. Freddie knows how to fight.
And she has my number too.
I think you're awesome, man. I listen to you on WHUR, Howard University. You and Dean Richardson. I love you, my man. Keep up the good work. We had to let them know. But I hope we can keep up the momentum.
We're going to do it. We're going to do it.
I feel wild because I'm still in the game at 61 because I can't retire.
And that's sad. That's really sad.
But the crazy part about it is I went to school to be a certified peer specialist. And I get out here, and what am I doing? Telemarketing.
Exactly.
But there's a lot of people out here with PhDs and stuff like that.
That's right.
And they can't even get a job as a telemarketer.
That's right.
Something ain't right.
No, it ain't.
But look, God bless you. Keep up the good work, brothers.
Yes, you are.
I love her too. I love him. God bless you.
All right. Good job, Hank. 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 Slam it every time. I went over to the memorial. I went over to the memorial last night, walked over there. King Stone.
Oh, yeah.
I said, brother, you know you want to speak still.
That's right. I flew over it when I came in today.
Oh, man.
And he needs to speak still.
He needs to still speak still.
Yeah. And catch him after I have a drink.
Oh, that's right. Good. Man, it's good. I'm glad to have been here.
As always, man, you on the case.
We got to do it, Doc.
You always on the
Institutional,
case.
I tell them all the time, institutional identity never can prison you with a prophetic call to you.
Come on, Doc.
If you let it do it, Vanderbilt knows it now. They know they paying for me being here. I told them I'm going and talking about jobs. That's what Black Church Study is supposed to do. ABC ain't gonna pay for it. You gonna pay for it. Thank you.
I love you, man. You do it.
That's
You
right.
do it.